Welcome to Hauntoween, and this is the story of the school teacher's house. This is a true story that I experienced myself. All of my life, it seems, I have been attracted to spirits, ghosts, things unseen, or they attracted to me. Even as young as the age of 5 in kindergarten, when I had made friends with a little girl, a new girl in our class that no one else seemed to want to play with, nor notice, and it never stopped there. Being able to see and sometimes speak to spirits followed me through my childhood, through teenage years, and into adulthood. And even my children have heard and seen things that most people have not, cannot, nor do they want to see. This place had no intention of ever having a ghostly take to it. But in the end, it was more than just your typical bump in the night or a light turning on in an empty room. This story was more terrifying. And in the end, having my family more than glad to flee what appeared to be a perfect home. It all started because our house needed repairs beyond the scope of my, shall we just call him the ex and have it done with, could, or should we just say it like it truly was, would do. And homeschooling my 3 kids, I wanted to have certain luxuries of life, such as heat, electricity, hot and cold running water, a stove to cook on, and a sink that wasn't a wash tub in the yard, shared with the mama bear and her cubs. I stumbled upon this house for rent with my mother and decided to call the number. I thought, no way would we be able to get this. My thoughts were move into town and I could find a part-time job and try save some money. That afternoon, I went with my mom and the kids to look at the house with a realtor. She did everything she could to get a deal negotiated for us to move in. I couldn't believe that this big house with 4 bedrooms, huge front porch, 3 stories, was ours in less than 24 hours. Move-in day, and I couldn't have been more excited. The kids chose their rooms and excitedly helped set up their belongings, few as they were. It didn't take long to bring things that were needed down. The downstairs was amazing. You walked into the front room and was faced with a staircase on the wall farthest away with 4 steps that went up to the first landing, which the opposite side 4 steps went down into the kitchen. From the landing, the steps took a right turn up 10 more steps to another landing, then a quarter turn to the left, 4 more steps, then a landing, another quarter turn, and then 6 more steps to the upper floor. It was as beautiful as it was awkward to manage the staircase. At the top of the staircase, to your left, was a door which led to another set of stairs that were just as awkward to manage as these that led to the 3rd floor. But instead of all the different stairs, it was 3 sets of 4 with 2 landings. Why am I telling you all of this? Because it is important, as you will see later in the story. The house was near perfect, other than some electrical issues which the electrician couldn't figure out. But he replaced the unfaulty sockets anyways, even though there was a backyard. All we ever did was go to the back door or the pantry window and stare at it. It wasn't very large. It was fenced in with a chain link fence, and the only way to access it was through the house. Even though there was a swing hanging from the tree, all the kids ever did was to stare, not blinking, out the back door, stare at the slowly swaying swing and the half-buried old Western Flyer tricycle below it. The house had belonged to a school teacher and her husband, who was some sort of an engineer. But what people recalled from the woman and the stories we were told were not always happy ones. Students in the high school hated having to be in her classes, especially the girls. She seemed to absolutely hate girls and would often lash out at them for the slightest of things, and often would punish them far worser than the boys ever got. We did know from the realtor that both the husband and wife had passed, and the estate went to the only family left, a niece and nephew that lived out of state. It hadn't taken long before the kids started fighting, saying that one or the other was in one of the other rooms at night trying to scare them. The girls' dolls suddenly started to have their heads ripped off, and my son insisted that he did not do it. One day, while we were sitting in the dining room having dinner, all of us at the table, one of the Barbie dolls' heads bounced down the stairs onto the landing and rolled into the kitchen before our very eyes. Upon looking, both of our Maltese, our cat, and our rabbit Binks were in the living room in plain sight. All I could do was tell my son I was sorry, as I picked up the doll's head and ran up the stairs to find the Barbie it belonged to in one of the girls' bedrooms. From here, things ramped up. The girls began sleeping in the same room, saying that they wanted to have the other bedroom just for a playroom. One day I decided to go to the attic. I wanted to see if there was a way to use the space up there. It was a full story. Room by room, the kids and I explored this area. The wallpaper had been peeling off, some hanging and waving in the stale air like Spanish moss from trees in southern heat, some laying on the floor, curled, crisp, and brittle. A few articles of old clothing hung on bars in little corner closets. Old lace curtains, turned brown by the sun, still hung on the windows. God only knows how long they had been hanging there. The last room, the door didn't want to open, and it seemed to be locked. All the doors in the house took skeleton keys. I remember turning around and saying to the kids, well, we'll have to do that room some other time. We'll have to find the skeleton key for that door. And there on the floor, in the middle of the hall, laid a skeleton key. I picked it up and put it in the lock and turned it. I flipped the latch, and it was as though all of us were holding our breath as the door opened slowly without my hand pushing on it. As we stood there, just trying to figure out everything we were seeing, there was just so much stuff. All we could see from the dim light of the window was outlines of everything, piles here and there. Slowly I stepped in, and I felt a rush of air on my face, and I remember thinking that there must be a window open or something, but the curtain hadn't moved in the far window. I reached my hand back, and without having to say anything, my son shoved the flashlight into it. I could feel my girls clinging to my shirt, and I could feel the fear that they were feeling. I turned and shined the beam into the dust in front of me. "No one has been in here in a long time," I said. "Mom, look at that baby doll bed over there," one of my girls said. I shined the light over in the direction she was pointing to. Baby girl, that's no baby doll bed. That's the real deal. That's a real baby cradle, and it's probably as old as I am or more." "Mom, look at this box. It has pictures in it." My son was slowly turning pages of an old photo album filled with pictures of a young couple and a baby girl. "Hey, Mom, isn't that this house?" I took a closer look at the picture. It was of the exact staircase that you see when you enter the front room. A young couple with a little baby girl, happy, smiling, sitting in a settee right by the staircase. That room was their parlor. Wow, that is amazing. I bet these pictures are of the owners, but I thought everyone said they had no kids. "Mommy, look at this cool old trunk. Can we open it?" I looked at what my daughter was pointing to, off to the side of the cradle, surrounded by piles of crates and boxes. "Sure, wait till I get there. I don't want you to break anything." I hadn't put anything together yet at this point, and for some time I still didn't. The explorer in me was in full motion, and at that moment we had stepped back in time and were met with a plethora of old artifacts that filled the senses with all kinds of things. We had to work at the trunk, but the latches gave way and we raised the lid, and inside was lined with small, delicate blankets and pretty dresses for a little girl, all neatly laid out and pressed flat in the trunk. An old album, much smaller than the one before, wrapped in paper, laid among the clothes on the top. The first page was a birth certificate. The next page was a newspaper article. The line was, "Child of school teacher found. Local school teacher may face charges in of her 4-year-old daughter." Now on this platform I cannot tell you the tragedy that took place that I read, but she obviously either was not charged or whatever the case was, whatever her charges were, whatever happened way back in the day, she did continue to teach school. The article was from December of 1945. I do know that she retired from teaching in the early 1970s. Now let's get back to the story. Now, as we were reading this article, the door to the room we were in slammed shut, and it slammed hard. And we all jumped and the kids screamed. I put everything back as quickly as I could, and I had a really bad feeling about being in the trunk and what we had read. The girls were crying, and my son was trying to get the door open, and he yelled, "It's locked. We're locked in here." Calming them down, I tried to get the door open. I didn't want to break it, but I was about to when I realized the key was still in the lock. I told my kids I needed a long, wide piece of paper or stiff cloth that will go under the door and a wire coat hanger. After a few minutes, I managed to push the skeleton key out of the other side of the lock and onto the flattened out roll of wallpaper, and I pulled it under the door. We all breathed a sigh of relief when the key unlocked the door opened, and we all went down the second floor. I took the skeleton key from the hook for the attic door, and I locked the attic door and put both skeleton keys on the hook. "Let's not go back up there again, guys," I said to my kids. From that day on, more and more things happened. Sounds of creaking like a rocking chair rocking on the floor on a third floor can be heard off and on all day and all night. Several times I went upstairs to find the door to the attic stairs not only wide open, but the skeleton key in the lock, the one in the stair door and the other in the door to the room filled with the baby things. On one of the very rare days that I was able to be home alone, that very old baby doll appeared on the sofa in the living room. I walked the entire house making sure I was home alone before grabbing it, heading back upstairs, and I knew the attic door would be open, and I knew where the doll had been. It had been in the cradle. I ran all the way up the stairs to the third floor, turned the skeleton key, felt the blast of hot air on my face, put the doll in its cradle, and pointed at it. "This is where you belong. This is your bed, your room. You stay here, do you hear me? Leave us alone," I shouted. I ran to the door, key still in my hand, locked it. I locked the attic door, took both keys with me, and kept them in my pocket. That afternoon, I got my very first of many migraines. So bad, I was sick to my stomach. Everyone told me for days what to do to get rid of it, but nothing seemed to work. Back in the 90s, there was nothing where you could search on the internet about attachments or anything like that. I did not know back then that this was a sign of an attachment. A few days later, I went to get dressed, and instead of putting the key in my pocket, I put them in my dresser drawer, and I thought, out of sight, out of mind, right? Later that day, after returning from a family barbecue, I realized I didn't have my migraine. It wasn't until I walked into my room I realized putting the keys in my dresser drawer didn't work. My drawer was open. The keys were gone. I walked back to the hallway. The skeleton key was in the door. I slowly opened the attic door, went upstairs to the attic, and there at the end of the hall, the door was open, and the doll was sitting on the floor in the doorway. I ran down to the doorway, pushed the doll in, shut and locked the door, pulled the key back out, and ran back downstairs, locking the attic door. I ran downstairs to the old plastic cross that hung in the house when we moved in. It had a thermometer in it, and I pulled it off the wall. I got a nail and a hammer, and I went back up to that attic door, and I nailed the cross to the front of that door. My ex had followed me, and he was looking at me as though I had lost my everlasting mind. And he said, "What you doing that for?" I was like, "Thought it would look pretty." The kids and I hadn't told him everything of what we had been seeing, as we were seeing so much as it already was. A couple weeks later, I had been hearing laughter of a little girl upstairs all day. We all had been hearing it. Then it sounded like doors slamming, and I was at my wit's end. I happened to look out my corner of my eye, and there in the living room sat that doll once again on the couch like it owned the place. 'Cause, well, I guess basically it did. And I grabbed the doll, then went to get the keys from where I had nailed them to the doorway of the cellar, and they were both gone. I ran upstairs, the doll in my hand. When I reached the attic door, it was open and the key was in it. I pulled the key out, putting it in my pocket, and ran to the 3rd floor. And of course, the door was open and the key was in it. I pulled the key out and put it in my pocket and ran up to the 3rd floor. And there, of course, the door was open to the room with all the baby stuff in it. I ran to it and I yanked the key out of that door also. And I ran in and I ran to the chest. I pulled out a baby blanket and I put the doll in the cradle along with the baby blanket and covered it. And I said, "There, now, go to sleep. This is your room. Stay here." And I ran out of the room. And as I crossed the threshold of the door slammed behind me. I fled to the attic steps, filled with panic, and before I could reach them, I felt my feet come out from underneath me. I felt like I was being dragged feet first down the stairs. I grabbed for the attic door as we reached the bottom of the attic steps, and it was as though I was being flung up against the wall. I was once again partially back on my feet, but not for long, as my feet were pulled back out from underneath me. My ex and kids came running. I could see the looks on their faces as I was once again dragged by my feet first down the stairs, landing after landing, and at one point trying to grab the rail post just to have my arm wrenched behind myself, then flung face first onto the floor in what was once their parlor. I lay there for quite a while, dazed and confused, trying to make sense out of what happened, hearing my kids crying, my arm twisted behind myself. We never spent another night in that house. Within a week, we were moved out. I had torn the muscles in my shoulder pretty bad, and still to this day have problems with it. But that's not where the story ended. Several months later, my niece and her young family moved in there. She and her husband had, I believe, 3 kids by this time, and she also experienced a lot of things, and so did her daughter. She had many tales of the 3rd story, but she never found the key to the room at the end of the hall. So she never went in there. But one scary thing that she told me was that she had a picture of me and my kids. Scary part is that she found it several weeks after she moved in, hanging on the inside of the attic door with an old jackknife through it, and it hadn't been there before. The last straw for them was hearing a child crying on the 3rd floor, thinking one of her kids were up there. She ran up to get them, and she got up there and there was no one. But when she turned around to come back down, she too was grabbed by her feet and pulled down every single flight of steps, around every corner, as though she were being grabbed and dragged by her feet and then flung into the parlor area face first. A short time later, they too moved from that same house. I hope everybody enjoyed this story tonight that I shared from some of my experiences as being an empath and someone that is connected with the spirit world. Not sure why. I've always had spirits and entities that reach out to me and connect with me. Sometimes they're not always good. Sometimes, for some unknown reason, things that connect with me are not things that I want to be in touch with. And sometimes they are. But everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I will talk to all of you guys in the comments down below. And I have many more stories like this to share with each and every one of you. And everyone have a most spooky and wonderful evening. Bye, guys.